Bound and tossed unceremoniously onto one of the panther sabre things, both Rhonin and an unconscious Krasis lay silently, bouncing up and down. Rhonin did wonder where their captors were taking them, but there wasn't really anything he could do about it at the moment. The Night Elves had placed a small emerald amulet around his and Krasis' necks, and any time the wizard even tried to think of a spell, he'd immediately feel the sharp pang of a migraine. Rhonin had noticed that their captors had grown a little bit more apprehensive since they'd entered this particular stretch of forest. The area felt different, and the Night Elves were no longer carrying themselves as lords of the land.
This isn't the path we took. This isn't the way it should be. We followed it back exactly as we should have, my captain. There was no deviation. Look around, Koltharius. What do you see? Because I see nothing but more damned trees. And there's something I don't like about them. Somehow, even with our eyes keen and our path understood, we've headed elsewhere. Should we turn back? Retrace our steps? No, not yet.
So, the group pushed forward. But, as they head ever deeper into the thick towering forest, even Rhonin started to feel himself getting slightly concerned. Because he could feel a growing presence, one the likes of which he'd never experienced before.
The sun's nearly upon us.
Something in the elf's voice suggested that the sun rising would be a bad thing, causing Rhonin to speculate that perhaps these beings were weaker during the day, as if them being called Night Elves wasn't a big giveaway. So all Rhonin had to do was rid himself of this damned amulet before the sun rose, and then the odds would surely swing back in his favour. However, as he started to bob his head about like a maniac to try and get the amulet off, he caught sight of something very weird in the bushes.
Right, my liver.
Rhonin blinked for a second, slightly taken aback, but when he opened his eyes, nothing. For a moment, Rhonin wondered if he'd just imagined that. Maybe he was just tired and hallucinating bush faces. But the Night Elf captors then suddenly stopped, looking very tense indeed. And then the entire forest erupted into chaos.
You are. I stab you right in your fucking face. You are.
Get him off me! Get him off me!
A leafy hand suddenly covered Rhonin's mouth. He turned his head to see a bush face again, and realised more leafy hands had now grabbed his legs. And the next thing he knew, he was being carried off by a whole bunch of little shrub-like dickheads.
You're bloody heavy, you are.
This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me.
However, the fact that a prisoner was being carried off by the sprite dickheads did not go unnoticed, because one elf, the one called Koltharius, raced past on his panther, turned, and then immediately started slicing away at the small creatures. But, out of nowhere, huge black birds then dropped from the foliage above and started harassing the Night Elf, and then a huge tree branch slammed right into his mount.
He won't be getting up from that one, will he?
The woodland sprites then continued on as if nothing had just happened like absolute sociopaths, carrying Rhonin for several minutes until he could no longer hear any of the screams and chaos that they'd just left behind. At which point, they stopped. One of the leafy creatures then approached Rhonin, smiled, and then thrust a small white flower in his face.
What's that? I don't want it.
But a tiny puff of pollen then shot out of the flower, splattering Rhonin's nose and mouth, and then the wizard passed out. A short while later, Krasis awoke to find himself and an unconscious Rhonin lying in the midst of some mystical glade. 'Twas an area of immense magic, ancient magic, as old as the dragons. Everything in it radiated peace, which Krasis couldn't help but feel was absolutely intentional. This was the chosen sanctum of some ancient being.
I would talk with you.
Sure enough, the cloppity-clop sound of hooves filled the air, and an extremely imposing 10-foot man-moose then approached.
I know you. Or, I know of you. And I know something of you, but not nearly as much as I would like. I am Cenarius. This is my realm.
Krasis searched his own mind, grasping for knowledge that felt somewhat out of reach. His memory had been pretty hazy since his and Rhonin's arrival in this unknown era. He knew Cenarius was a demigod, as powerful as the Great Aspects, but other than that...
You are not well, traveller. Perhaps you should rest more. No, I would speak now, as you'd like. You are more than what you've seen. I see hints of Night Elven, but also sense far, far more. You almost remind me of... No, that's unlikely. He's unlike any creature to be found within or without my domain. We've come a great distance, and we're frankly lost, Great One. We know not where we are.
At that, Cenarius just laughed.
You must be from far off indeed. Where else could you be, my friend? Where else but Kalimdor?
Kalimdor? That didn't really narrow it down much.
I suspected as much, my lord. But I sensed an unsettling change in the world. An imbalance. A shifting. I sought out its origin and location in secret. And although I did not find all that I searched for, it did lead me to the two of you. Two wanderers from nowhere. Two lost souls from nothing. You are both enigmas, and that troubles me. Yet you saved us from captivity.
Again, the Forest Lord's snort laughed.
The Night Elves grow more arrogant. They take what does not belong to them and trespass where they are not wanted. It is their assumption that everything falls under their domination. Your captors did not quite intrude upon my realm, but I chose to make them do so, in order to teach them a lesson in humility and manners. That, and they simply made it simpler for me by bringing what I desired directly here. The elves, they also seem to be aware of our sudden arrival. Zinashari is not without its own abilities. It does, after all, overlook the well itself.
The Dragon Mage's eyes then widened.
Zinashari. Aye, mortal. The capital of the Night Elves' domain. You know not even that.
Balls. Even with his fractured memory, Krasis immediately knew what that meant. A very, very long time ago, both Zinashari and the Well of Eternity had been destroyed by complete catastrophe. A catastrophe that ripped the entire world asunder.
We will leave as soon as we can, and trouble you no longer. Little one, you misunderstand. You are both puzzle and guest to me. For as long as you remain the former, you will also remain the latter. I believe that you need sustenance. It shall arrive shortly. You should rest until then.
Krasis knew better than to decline that offer. If the Forest Lord insists that you stay, then you stay. Looked like he and Rhonin were guests for as long as Cenarius desired. Meanwhile,
I warn you, my darling counsellor, I adore surprises, but this one I expect to be quite delicious.
Xavier smiled as he led the Queen towards the glowy circle. This new revelation might not be quite what the ruler of the Night Elves had had in mind, but the Lord Counsellor had no doubt she would not be disappointed. However,
it looks no different. Just wait, Light of 1,000 Moons.
The Queen frowned and continued to gaze towards the green inferno.
It strikes me as unchanged, dear Xavius. I expect...
I am coming.